Welcome to Mask Live. Today's episode is on regulating emotions. We will be discussing how to help your child create a foundation of emotional regulation. We are excited to tune into Gabrielle's expertise and learn how to catch, cope, and create opportunities for your child to cope with their emotions. Gabrielle is from Midwestern University. Dr. Gabrielle Rozio earned her doctorate degree in clinical psychology from Midwestern University in 2020 after receiving her master's in counseling from Arizona State University in 2016. She has completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Arizona, where she majored in family studies and minored in psychology. Currently, Dr. Rozio is a postdoctoral resident at Midwestern University Therapy Institute. In this role, she provides individual and couples counseling to adults struggling with depression, anxiety, feeling stuck, life transitions, and relationship dissatisfaction. In addition, she supervises clinical psychology graduate students and teaches. We are so excited to have you today, and especially having a conversation on this overall regulating our emotions. I mean, we're going to be talking about how to help our children, set them up for success, but I think we all can use a tune up for sure.
Yes.
So, what I love to do is to really everybody that we talk to, find out what started you on this road of passion for you.
So it really started way back in elementary school. I kid you not, I remember being on the yellow school bus every day back and forth from school, sitting with different kids and different friends, different peers, and I would talk to them every day back and forth about different things that were going on at home, different things that were going on with their friends. And I was so young, and I was always interested in helping my friends get along and, talking them through, how to cope with things at home. And it sounds silly, but it really was way back when in elementary school on the school bus that I started to realize that I'm really interested in interpersonal relationships, that I'm interested in why people do what they do. And I wanted to help people have more successful relationships and lives.
So I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit. There's a lot of questions that we want to talk about, but I think it's so important. I mean, we have to address what we went through, what we're currently dealing with, during the pandemic, I guess the pre and post and during the pandemic. How how have you seen that affect people's interpersonal relationships because of it?
So there's been a lot of impacts from COVID. If we're talking about specifically from an emotional regulation standpoint, we've
Yes.
really tested all of our skills throughout this entire pandemic. And if we think about it from ourselves as an adult, all the ways that we have been tested to stay calm and to be able to be flexible and adapt to the changes that we faced, and then keep in mind how challenging it was for us, we can then think about how much more challenging it probably was for children. So I think it makes sense that we have seen a significant increase in outreach to therapy services here at my clinic and at clinics across the country. Just an increased need in support and in skills to cope with all of the uncertainty and the ambiguity that we're experiencing right now because of COVID and all of the changes. And that's really what emotion regulation is. It's being able to adapt and respond to strong emotions and be flexible to change. So I definitely have seen an increase in the need to work on emotion regulation skills with children and with adults.
Well, think about it. Look at as just a parent, how much we were thrown at us. Our whole world's collapsed, basically, with
Mhm.
work, play, family. It's like We had to learn how to coexist with our families 24/7.
24, and that really tests the limits, right, of our ability to regulate the frustration when we don't have a break.
Right, right. And then the impact of taking on your kids' stuff and helping them transition, to online school and just all the fears and everything with that by, while trying to stay calm, be present, and model for our kids how to adapt, to this
Yes.
life. So,
It's definitely been a challenge, and I've worked with kiddos on the one side and with adults on the other, just really parents being honest about feeling tapped out or not knowing how to manage all of the responsibilities when they're used to having that break of the drive into work or the drive home. They're used to having a routine, a different routine, and now that's also really important and plays a role in our children's ability to regulate their emotions. When they know what to expect, they're calmer. When there's changes every day, because one day dad's watching us, one day mom's watching us, one day grandma's watching us, because parents are adjusting to all of the changes, they're also being tested, and kids can struggle.
So when it
all that.
comes to emotional regulation, how would you best explain what that is?
So when I think about emotion regulation skills, what I'm thinking about and what I'm, the core theme that I'm wanting to convey is we're not trying to eliminate feelings. Okay. When we're regulating and we're monitoring, we're talking about the intensity and the frequency of our emotions. Feelings are good. Feelings help us. They're signals from our body that we're feeling good or that something doesn't feel right. But what we want to help children do is be able to calm themselves down when they get upset or when they experience some other strong emotion and adjust to changes in expectations. When we're able to moderate and control our emotions, reduce the intensity of the experience and of the expression, their children are then able to achieve goals, complete tasks, and have better control over their behavior. And so that's kind of the premise. We're wanting to not get rid of emotions, but help us monitor the intensity of the experience.
So what types of situations do you see that children have the most hard time regulating with their emotions?
There are a lot of situations, and I'm sure parents can attest to some of the ones that they see most frequently. But before I even go into the situations, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about what dysregulation might look like, so that we all kind of have an understanding of the different shapes and forms that dysregulation can take. So when you're thinking about dysregulation, this might be a tantrum, right? That might, a lot of people might say, okay, I can definitely tell that my kid is dysregulated. Maybe it's a meltdown, maybe it's an outburst. But for some kids, the distress is not as obvious. So it is not just an outburst that you can see and that you can recognize immediately. For some kiddos, the distress seems to build gradually, and it's kind of happening on an internal level over time as they're trying to cope with their emotions as best they can. And then sometimes when after that buildup just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it eventually leads to some sort of outburst. So just because you're not seeing an outburst in a moment doesn't mean that your child is not experiencing dysregulation internally. So I just want to make sure that we make that point clear. And then for other kiddos, when they're dysregulated, the response is instantaneous and there's a huge giant reaction that's clear for everybody to see. So it's important to recognize that there are nuances. It may involve crying. Emotion dysregulation might involve kicking and screaming. It might involve property destruction, right? So just be mindful of all the different shapes and forms that dysregulation can take. And then going back to your question, the situations that I most commonly hear about are when parents or teachers or other individuals that work with children come to me and say that they're struggling with children who are dysregulated is oftentimes, and again, I'm sure parents can attest to this, it's a lot of times being asked to engage in an activity that they don't enjoy. So being asked to sit quietly in a doctor's office, or being asked to stop doing something they enjoy like play video games, right? Like that's a big one. My kid, I give a 5-minute warning. I do everything I can. And still when it's time to turn off a video game, everything goes haywire. So that's a common one.
Yeah.
And then being in a store, being in public, when the child is being required to regulate and to control their emotions. Maybe they're frustrated, maybe they're excited, maybe they have a lot of energy and they're being told to sit still and stand by the cart and talk in an inside voice. All of that is requiring them to inhibit their emotional expression. Another common one is difficulty with homework. So oftentimes parents will say that their child doesn't want to do homework or is avoiding homework. And a lot of times that's because there's some emotion that's being evoked or triggered when it's time to do homework. It's often secondary to what the real barrier is. So if a child is having difficulty in a subject, they might avoid the homework and present this in a dysregulated way. They'll throw their pencil across the table or they'll stomp away from the desk. But really it's because they might be struggling with the subject, and that's evoking a strong emotion. And in order to not have to deal with the homework, there's an outburst. So that's another common one. And then for certain kiddos that struggle with transitions, we might see some dysregulation when we're transitioning from home to school. So parents will say in the morning, it is just the hardest thing to get from the front door to school, right? There's pushback, there's kicking and screaming, there's I don't want to go to school. And so there's likely a strong emotion that's triggering the kiddo to kick and scream and throw their backpack and not want to go to school. So those are some of the common ones. And then one that I'll kind of be talking about, and I think I might have mentioned it a little bit earlier, is changes in expectations. So kiddos do best with a routine. And when they're expecting to get picked up at 3 and they don't get picked up until 4, they start to feel things. Where is my mom? Where is my dad? Who's coming to get me? Did someone forget about me? All of that is triggering emotion, and it can trigger an outburst, a tantrum, a meltdown. So kids benefit most from consistency. And when we see changes in expectations, a lot of times we see strong negative emotions in kiddos.
Right. So that to me sounds like really the age bracket of elementary age years. What type of situations do you see for more of your teens with like what situations prompt their emotions?
So for teens, I would say two of the top 2 situations that the research has talked about is conflict with parents and conflict with peers. Because in teenage years, there is a transition in focus from parents being the center of their universe to friendships. So when there's difficulties with social groups or not getting onto a team or not having somewhere to sit for lunch, having a fight with a significant other if they're dating, those types of situations can produce very strong emotions that can be difficult to regulate. And a lot of times in those teenage years, we will start to see different acting out behaviors, not necessarily tantrums and outbursts, but we might start to see withdrawal, isolation, some self-harm. Those are some signs that a teenager is experiencing some dysregulation and finding it hard to cope with what they're feeling. And then with parents, again, having a very strong, very big, let's say, argument. Kiddo wants to go to a concert with their friends and parents say no. Feeling restricted and not being able to exert their free will and freedom can also produce very strong emotions. And when they're difficult to regulate, we see different acting out behavior.
So one of the questions is the ability or inability to regulate emotions more nature or more nurture?
So something that we say often in psychology, I mean, even, professors talks in the research, which doesn't always help. And it's kind of ironic, but it depends, right? And so because psychology is not a hard science, the answer is really both. The ability or inability to regulate emotions is related to our nature and to our nurture. And the percentage really depends on the circumstances. So to put it as simply as possible, emotional control issues are viewed as a combination of genetic and environmental factors. So on the genetic end, on the biological end, we talk about temperament, which is a child's innate capacity for self-regulation. So what the tools and the skills that an infant is born with is their temperament. And for those of you that have children or multiple children, you might recall that one of your babies was really easy tempered, and they were flexible and they were accommodating, and they just, you could take them anywhere. They had a predominantly positive mood. We would call that just an easy temperament. They were born with this ability to self-soothe and to have, be in all different types of environments with different noise levels and just be comfortable. Now, maybe you would say, well, my second or third was such a fussy baby and they were difficult to regulate. They were always irritable. They had, high emotional reactivity. They were crying. I couldn't get them to self-soothe. That is what we would call kind of a difficult temperament. So we are kind of born with that innate capacity at birth. And that's just the set we're kind of given, right? And this component is generally stable, okay? Not to say that the environment in parenting practices cannot influence it, but pretty much temperament is kind of stable over time. Now, when we think about the environmental factors, parenting practices and environment are what we would consider. So let's say you have a child who has temper tantrums and the parent is now being taxed with responding to the temper tantrums. There are different approaches that parents can take. So some parents might work overtime and might overinvest to help their child soothe, right? Because the child is difficult, they're not able to do it on their own. The child is not developing, that self-discipline. So parents become almost external self-regulators. They become the force that helps the child regulate. And as a byproduct of that, the child doesn't develop the skills that they need internally, okay? So basically the child is outsourcing their self-regulation, and that can be problematic because the child doesn't learn the skills on their own. So that is one way that parenting practices can influence the temperament. On the other hand, let's say you have an easy-tempered child and parents are modeling their own self-regulation, and their self-regulation techniques include stomping their feet, slamming doors, and raising their voice. So we now have an easy-tempered child who's in an environment where there's raised voices, there's behavioral concerns, and so that child is learning all of those behaviors. Right. So we can see how it can be influenced by the environment in parenting practices.
So it really, like I just posted today, and it's like, don't pick up a crying baby. And so does it really starts from the very beginning on really allowing your kids to learn how to self-soothe and regulate their emotions, because that's just a byproduct of what they're dealing with, right? So
yes,
we really aren't supposed to pick up the crying baby.
and you'll have people who will very strongly believe you have to pick up the crying baby every single time. And then you will have others who say you don't pick up the crying baby, right? And I think people have their arguments for both. And I don't think either of them necessarily are wrong. What I do recognize and what I can say is that providing children the opportunity to develop the skills by supporting them in developing skills, by giving them tools, by giving them experiences and the language, right? Giving the child the resource, and even an infant, like giving them a transitional object, giving them a blanket, a pacifier, whatever it is to help them do it is what's going to be beneficial, so that they're not, like I said, outsourcing their self-regulation skills. If they don't learn, the problems then become bigger and more persistent over time.
Yeah. So I guess how can parents help support their kids in elementary, their kids that are teenagers, to really self-regulate their emotions?
So there are a lot of ways. There are a lot of ways. So I'm going to try to kind of give you some succinct, specific examples of what parents can do. So you can walk away with some tangible strategies for listeners. So first and foremost, especially for younger ones, but for adolescents as well, is to make sure your kid gets enough sleep. I think, this may go without saying, but when we're tired, we're more irritable and we have more difficulty regulating our emotions. If you think about it from a percentage standpoint, when your child is starting the day with 50% capacity, they only have 50% of their resources to be able to regulate their emotions, to calm themselves down. And I think we can all attest to that. I mean, I know when I'm tired, I'm cranky. I have less patience, right? I'm a little more snappy when I'm tired. Or if we're hungry, right? We just don't have our full cup full of resources to be able to dedicate to regulating our emotions. So first and foremost is to try to help our kiddos get regular, consistent, sufficient sleep. Then after that, my second recommendation, and this again, based on the research, is that following a routine is key. We know that when we begin working with a child or with an adolescent who's dysregulated and we start implementing some consistency and we start to implement different ways for them to anticipate what's going to happen throughout their day, there's less uneasiness, with less uncertainty, right? There's more predictability and they're able to say, okay, I know how I'm going to feel in a half an hour when mom picks me up. I know what's going to happen when we have dinner at a restaurant. So following a routine and consistency is important. So that they know that they will have time to rest, that they will have time to play, that they will have time to eat. That is my second recommendation. Third is to start teaching your children about emotions early, as early as possible. And again, I think this can sound hard or daunting because feelings and emotions are abstract. We can't hand someone an emotion and have a child look at an emotion and feel an emotion, right? It's an abstract concept that children sometimes struggle to connect with, but it can be done because children who understand their emotions are less likely to act out. If a child is able to say, I'm mad at you, they're less likely to hit, right? If a child is able to say, I'm scared, they're less likely to cry. So we want to really encourage parents to teach their children just about emotions in general, because when we have language, we're able to express our emotions easier. If you think about preschoolers, a lot of times, or even younger, we see more temper tantrums and more outbursts and more meltdowns simply because they don't have the words to say how they're feeling. And they know that other people around them don't understand them. So like, I'm feeling something and I can't tell anybody what it is. And this is frustrating. Or they're, babbling, right? And they're feeling something, but nobody understands what the babble is. And that's frustrating. So we start with just helping children name their feelings. And this, again, can be developmentally appropriate. So with a younger child, you begin with just helping them understand and explore basic emotions like happy, mad, sad, scared, some of those primary emotions. With older kids, they're able to benefit from learning more complex feelings like embarrassed or disappointed or nervous. So we want to encourage parents to start using this language and helping their child identify when they're feeling an emotion. One good way to do this is through books and television. So if you're ever watching TV with your child or you're doing story time in the evening, you can start to implement some questions that are going to be keying towards the emotions that the characters might be feeling. So you might say, how do you think little Johnny is feeling right now when his playmate stole his toy? So you want to start having the child think about that and begin to engage in perspective taking skills. Or if you see a character crying, what do you think might be making Dora cry or might be making Dora sad? And cueing them to acknowledge the emotions that the characters might be feeling, and then saying why. So what might they be feeling and why? Another way to kind of incorporate this into your daily routine is to have conversations with your kiddos about their feelings on a daily basis. So oftentimes children don't just volunteer their emotions, right? You say, how was their day? Good. How was gym? Good, right?
Fine, fine.
Yeah, fine. What did you have for lunch? A sandwich, right? And so sometimes it feels like it's blinky. So we can ask a little bit more specific, pinpointed questions and say, how are you feeling today? What feeling did you have when you were sitting in math class? What was it like being in PE today? So you're challenging and you're inviting your child to really think about their emotions, because otherwise they're likely just going to say fine, right? When there was an emotion and they're maybe just not connecting with it. So we're going to try to facilitate a conversation about feelings. And then if they're struggling with that, as a parent, you can also point out when you notice what your child might be feeling. So you can say, you look really happy that we're going for ice cream. It seems like, you're really frustrated that we're not able to play video games any longer. And so you're helping them identify, I'm seeing this behavior. It seems like frustrated describes what you're experiencing right now. And then the kid can check in with themselves. Okay, frustrated. What I'm feeling right now when I'm not able to do what I want to do is frustrated or happy. Because they might just be smiling about going for ice cream, but not necessarily able to label the happy. So parents can support by pointing out what they think their child might be feeling in a particular situation. So that's just about teaching the emotions part.
Right. Well, I think so. We're going to be breaking away now,
Mhm.
but when we're going to be diving more into how parents can help support that, why it's so important to help your children regulate their emotions, and the consequences of not having that in place. It's so important. We are going, like I said, we're going to break, but you will be able to watch this full episode on the Mask Matters app. You can download it. It's on Apple and Google Play. We just launched some new, we call it mask printables, making it easy for parents to, develop all of these social skills for children. We actually launched just recently the Reveal How I Feel sheets that parents can print and put up on the fridge, and literally their kids can help point out what feeling they're feeling, so we can open up that emotional vocabulary for kids, because that's really the first part of it. So please download the Mask Matters app so you can have parenting solutions at your fingertips to watch this in its entirety. So we'll see you back.